Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. I'm going to kick this video off discussing ray tracing performance on RDNA 2 and how it's probably going to be getting a lot better than what we're used to right now. RDNA 2 is the first architecture from AMD which does support hardware-based ray tracing. The RX 5000 series of cards from AMD did not support it, and we saw a pretty large jump from Nvidia with RTX 20 to RTX 30 series with their ray tracing performance. And while, as I've reported numerous times now, I believe that Lovelace as well as AMD's RDNA 3 are going to substantially up the ante here for ray tracing, well, yeah, what about RDNA 2? There's a very interesting Twitter thread, which I'll link to in the video description, where Philip was doing some testing of different methods of generating rays on the GPU. We'll go into what they are in just a second. What he found was with optimization, which in his words didn't require that much work, ray tracing performance was increased substantially. And while a lot of people just assume ray tracing is just for nice reflective puddles or nicer looking, glass reflections or whatever, the reality is ray tracing can be used for a host of different things, including but not limited to ray traced audio, as well as also AI stuff as well. I'll be covering this a lot more extensively in the not too distant future, but let's have a look at what Philip said. Again, I will link his thread in the description and I would encourage you to check it out. So Philip said, and I quote, "The TLDR, there is a significant headroom in RDNA 2 ray tracing with efficient coding. I was able to increase the performance of my 6800 XT," then he links to a GitHub thing, "by 19% with some small changes. These can be summed up as switching to Wave 32 and reducing FGPRs. So those are vector general purpose registers for those who want to know. Let's have a look at a couple of the scenes that he compiled together here in the same tweet. Scene 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. So Wave 64 is base, i.e. the default way of handling this. So this is 0% because, it's the base that everything else he's going to, compare to. So switching to Wave 32 increases this. Let's call it, worst case scenario around 5%, best case scenario around 6.5%. Not bad, not bad, not bad. But when he optimized it, particularly for the VGPRs, performance went up significantly. Worst case scenario, which again seems to be scene 4, was around 15%. However, other scenes were much more performance, over 20%. He then created another tweet which compared how the different scenes fared on different GPUs. So this time he was using a 69, nice, 100 XT, and comparing it against the 3090 FE and also the RTX 2080 Ti. The too long didn't read, as you can see for yourself here, that oftentimes, yes, the 6900 XT was still slower than the RTX 3090, but in a couple of cases it actually did very well, and almost consistently now was either as performant as the RTX 2080 Ti or not that far behind, which again is a significant step forward. He also went ahead and explained this a little bit better. A lot of it depends on the individual situation. Wavefront 64, which is the default way this is handled, has a lot of advantages, but in the case of RT wavefronts, they were diverging too quickly, so most of the ALU sat idle. In Wave 32 mode, the wavefronts were much smaller and could be terminated more effectively. He also said that it's not just the wavefronts that are causing the issue, some of the problems stem from vector register pressure. UE4 RT has a lot of vector passes at 128 FGPR, which limits the occupancy to around 50%. Coincidentally, Nvidia's hardware offers 128 FPGR per warp. End quote. What he's basically saying here, and I'm going to summarize it just so that the larger majority of the audience actually understands this. Again, I would encourage you to read through the entire thread, as it's tons of useful information out there, and for those who are programmers, you can do your own digging. But what he's basically saying is that by cutting down the size of the wave from 64 to 32, which is obviously half the size, it helps. But it also comes down to actually optimizing for the general purpose registers on the GPU. Basically, what seems to be happening is that they're putting tons of pressure on those registers. They're basically not able to deal with the amount of data when they're not being optimized. And so what you're finding is that the GPU itself, the actual ALUs or the processors, if you want, of the GPU, because each compute unit, obviously for RDNA 2, has 64, although technically they're dual compute units on RDNA 2s or an RDNA 1, so I guess it's 128, but that's semantics. Either way, they are not being fully occupied with the work, and that's why we're dealing with lower performance. So what does that actually mean for games developers and, more importantly, us as gamers when it comes to the Xbox, PlayStation and PC, as obviously all of them share essentially a very similar architecture when it comes to ray tracing. They're all using AMD's IP, albeit with a few tweaks here and there for their respective platform. Well, it basically means that there is a ton of room left in the tank, and it's going to come down to tweaks and optimization. When I leaked the RX 6700 XT performance results for ray tracing quite recently, I was told that, AMD themselves believes that ray tracing on their own GPU is going to start improving significantly. Oh, and also, as a very quick side note on this, I'm being asked a lot about Resident Evil 8, Village if you prefer, because AMD are pushing this at the moment for the their own GPUs, basically, for ray tracing. Now, to my understanding, and I could be incorrect here, to my understanding, AMD basically have a marketing deal, which is one of the reasons that they're able to, push this, and the reason that Nvidia cards are not mentioned in ray tracing. To my understanding, it's not a hardware limitation, it's more a marketing deal. Now, how this works on Nvidia cards, I don't know. Maybe eventually there will be a patch for RTX 30 cards, for example, to get ray tracing support on Resident Evil Village, or it might just be at launch. I would imagine it would be at launch, but that's just a guess on my part. But primarily, it's just a marketing deal. Getting back to what I was saying, though, it really this has become such a meme at this point, but it really is tools optimization, familiarity with the game developers, game engine, and a ton of other different things which come together to form the performance that we are looking at a game. And at the end of the day, we are still really early. I mean, just for example, Nvidia with the ray tracing and DLSS support of Turing, yeah, sure, it was partly because obviously we've seen a pretty large jump between Turing and Ampere, but also just, quite frankly, developers now are starting to understand better ray tracing. Like, ray tracing isn't new technology. It's been around for a long ass time. The problem is real-time ray tracing hasn't. And that's because, well, the technology in terms of hardware has only recently started to come around where developers are able to employ this in real time. Sure, if you had a movie, which, you can do an offline render and it takes like 2 hours to produce one frame, okay, that's fine. But if you're trying to play like the new Doom game or something like that, one frame every 2 hours, that might not be the best gaming experience. That might be pushing the cinematic experience just a little bit too far, even for games developers. So at the end of the day, this is still really early, but it's still very positive news. Do I think that this is going to be something that's going to rocket propel RDNA 2 to be more performant in ray tracing than Ampere, for example? No, probably not. At the end of the day, these are only Philip's results here. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Philip's results, but it is important to realize that this is only his findings. But I do believe that it is going to be a great insight into what we see going forward with games. And you have to remember that RDNA 2 only very recently launched. It was late last year, and the console's pretty much the same time frame. And yeah, of course, developers did have access to the hardware earlier, but even so, it's not like developers have had that long really to get used to ray tracing on RDNA 2. So I do think performance is going to be a lot better. Nvidia too will benefit from the experience of developers when it comes to hardware-based ray tracing as they get more and more used to the hardware. And since the Nintendo Switch at this point seems all but certain to use Nvidia's DLSS technology, as a small update, I had yet another source tell me that they believe that Nintendo has at least spoken with Nvidia regarding DLSS, and they're pretty sure that the two have kind of formed some type of agreement. Although again, I don't know the exact details of the implementation. I'm trying to find that out. Long story short though, there is a lot of tech that is new. Mesh shaders on the Xbox haven't even been used yet in any release game, as I covered just recently. Hardware-based ray tracing is still very early in the pipeline Fortunately, Nvidia did push out Turing, which did help somewhat to educate games developers, but you know, it's still quite early on, and Nvidia's implementation was it wasn't perfect. Let's just be honest. Like, the industry was kind of stumbling forward into the dark. So it's going to be very cool to see how games evolve over the next couple of years. I think that there are going to be some pretty large changes in the market. The final piece of news for today is FPS Boost is now going to be enabled on several Zenimax titles. Since they've now come to Game Pass, this is obviously a really good thing and going to be super duper handy for those who are going to be experiencing these games at the first time. Those titles are Fallout 76, goody gumdrops, Fallout 4, much better, Dishonored, Definitive Edition, Skyrim, and finally Prey. Prey actually is quite fun. I think it flew somewhat under the radar, but it's a really cool game, at least in my opinion. So yeah, this is just a small update just to let you guys know that this is actually a thing. I do feel that Xbox are doing a really good thing here with the FPS boost. Personally, I'm not someone who really enjoys 30 FPS experiences. It's one of the primary reasons I typically will play games on the PC, because obviously I've got that level of control. So I think that Microsoft going back basically to kind of their archive and improving the frame rates or resolution or whatever of games is going to be definitely a good thing. These games are old, like Skyrim at this point, everyone has played it like 2 billion times over, but still, it does help to make the experience smoother and nicer and I guess more tolerable in this current generation. So personally speaking, I think it's pretty damn cool anyway. With that all said, thank you very much for watching the video. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.